I have so many fond memories memories playing Halo growing up. Halo 1, 2, and 3 all came out during my middle school and high school years. Xbox Live was a big thing. Man, but I do have some mixed feelings about the Campaign Evolved remake. We're not going to be getting the PvP multiplayer. There will be some online co-op though. That's good. And you know what? It's another chance to dive into Halo. I'm definitely going to at least be giving it a shot because like I said, Halo does mean a lot to me. Played it on console. Today we're getting the PC system requirements, and this is an Unreal Engine 5 game, so what does that mean? Also, Xbox, PC, the stats, man, I wish I could see how much time I had put into Halo growing up on Xbox, but I don't have that really attached to my account anymore now that I'm usually on PC. But check this out. If you're like me, you love tracking and visualizing all your gaming stats, but you don't just game on PC, and even on PC there are multiple launchers and stores with their own tracking systems. It'd be great to have it all in one place. That's where PlayTracker comes in, and a huge thank you to PlayTracker for sponsoring this part of today's video. PlayTracker is an app that connects to various gaming platforms including Steam, Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, Epic Games, GOG, Retro Achievements, EA Origin, Ubisoft, Riot, and Battle.net, and combines all of your data in one place. It offers fun challenges and progression systems, advanced game library labeling and sorting, a unified cross-platform social experience, and even stats and graphs about games and the types of players that play them. You can even get a Spotify Wrapped style recap of your year in gaming with PlayTracker Replay. I love that PlayTracker enables you to chase the best deals on games without worrying so much about fragmenting your stats, and there's even giveaways you can qualify for by completing challenges, all while clearing out that embarrassingly large backlog you built up. Check out PlayTracker by following the sponsored link in the video description and/or pinned comment. All right, so here are the PC system requirements, and I have a caution before you go too far into this. So they are giving us a resolution and frame rate target, which is great, and we got a lot of variety in that, which is awesome. And I think these even correspond to the graphics preset, like low, medium, high, and ultra. In some system requirements charts, those are actually just naming the experience you'll get rather than the actual graphic settings. But since they also call this one recommended and call this one minimum, I believe these are actually talking about the graphic settings presets. But caveat, this is an Unreal Engine 5 game, and oftentimes those are reliant on upscaling for reasonable performance, and sometimes they don't tell you when they're relying on upscaling in the systems requirements chart. This game is being developed by the same people who did the Oblivion remastered Unreal Engine 5 makeover, and that game did include upscaling as part of the presets. So, for example, if I just Google it off the top of my head, we're getting that the low preset, to be clear, this was for Oblivion Remastered, but same developer, also using Unreal Engine 5. The low preset also basically turned on performance mode upscaling. The medium preset effectively turned on quality level upscaling. The high preset was 71 to 77% of native resolution. And then the ultra preset was basically native. According to a quick Google search, I don't remember the values off the top of my head. That seems to correspond roughly to what I recommend. Well, it's not what I recommended, but what I remember happening when I tested out the game. The point is that the previous Unreal Engine 5, game remake we saw from these developers did include upscaling in the graphics presets, and that might be the case here. So take all of these with that caveat that this might already be using upscaling to hit these performance numbers, but we don't know that for sure at this time. Also, does this game include ray tracing? Well, if you check out the Xbox store, it does list ray tracing. Now, this is Unreal Engine 5. Their Lumen GI has a software-based mode and a hardware RT accelerated based mode. I also noticed my shirt is sparkly because it's a little bit green and I'm on a green screen. That's interesting. Anyway, enjoy. Their previous game, again, the Oblivion Remastered, did offer the hardware-based Lumen as an option. You could also turn that off and use the software-based Lumen, and it's unclear which one would be being used in the system requirements if that is indeed the case. I am noticing that every GPU listed here does support hardware-based ray tracing, but I imagine on some of these lower settings, they would certainly be having the hardware RT turned off. But just another thing to maybe keep in mind in these system requirements. Now, what are we actually seeing? Well, we could talk about the GPUs, but first I want to mention that I think these CPUs are falling into a bit of a trap that a lot of system requirements do, which is I think they're misleading. So the thing about increasing resolution is that increasing resolution does not typically put much of an additional burden on the CPU, the kinds of things that a CPU does. Now, increasing graphic settings can increase the burden on the CPU, but oftentimes there's not a ton of scalability there. Especially if there's a fixed amount of enemies and you're not changing like the crowd density and NPCs that don't really matter in like an open world city or something like that. So what I'm trying to say is if a Ryzen 5 3600 can actually hit 60 FPS at the low settings, I highly doubt that turning on the high or ultra settings will suddenly require a Core i9-13900K just to hit 60 frames per second. I think that a lot of studios, when they put out these PC system requirements, what they're really doing is they have some test systems that they've tested, and they kind of have a lower end older system, some kind of, an older mid-range system, a little bit of a higher system, and then some kind of fancy new system. And they don't necessarily, I think, always separate out the CPUs and the GPUs from what's actually required to hit the performance targets that they're listing. In other words, I think they're overstating the CPUs that are actually required to hit 60 FPS at 4K. If a Ryzen 5 3600 can actually hit 60 FPS here. By the way, Ryzen 5 3600 is pretty similar in actual gaming performance to what you get in the consoles like a PlayStation 5. And so assuming, Xbox Series X and PS5 has a 60 FPS performance mode, which I would assume it would, especially for a first-person shooter, then it would make sense that a Ryzen 5 3600 can hit 60 FPS at least most of the time. Sometimes consoles will dip at times. And that everything from here would probably actually be allowing you to hit higher frame rate experiences if you adjust the graphics settings enough and your GPU is capable of keeping up. So I feel like that column probably is a bit overstated and misleading. Now, also note that they're saying 32 gigabytes of system RAM could be needed if you're playing at 4K resolution at higher ultra settings. But if you're sticking to the lower medium settings, and especially at 1080p or 1440p, they're saying 16 gigabytes of system RAM could be okay. Now, it might actually be the case that 16 gigabytes of system RAM would still be okay here, and they just put 32 gigabytes in those heavier test systems. So I wouldn't necessarily rule out the possibility of getting by with 16 gigabytes of system RAM, considering how expensive RAM is these days. Although you will need 100 gigabytes of SSD space, so do keep that in mind. Also, if you hear a alarm ringing, that's on my end. Don't go checking your house for that. I think that was going off somewhere in my house. Anyway. So the GPU side of things, though, let's talk. So this is where most of the graphic settings and the resolution and all of that have an effect. And if you don't see your GPU listed, I can help you out a little bit with the Tech Power Up Relative Performance chart. It helps us get an idea of where other GPUs line up relative to what they're saying here. So 1080p 60 FPS at low settings, potentially with some upscaling enabled that might not be being explicitly stated here. Remember that. They're saying RTX 2060 Super or RX 6600 or Intel Arc A580. Now, those are actually all pretty equivalent performance. Remember that these system requirements charts aren't a benchmark chart saying they will get exactly the same performance. They're just giving you a ballpark. The 2060 Super, by the way, is an 8 gigabyte graphics card. So I think all of these GPUs they're listing have at least 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Maybe you could get by with 6 or, but we don't know. They are listing cards with 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, 2060 Super came out in 2019, so it is getting fairly old at this point. And if we set that as the baseline in the Tech Power Up Relative Performance chart, which I'll link in the video description, you can see the A580 is right along that same line of performance, and the RX 6600 is also right along that same level of performance. With hardware-based ray tracing, the 2060 Super would usually pull ahead of the RX 6600. But again, these lower settings, I would imagine, probably aren't relying on the on the hardware-based ray tracing for the GI. Now, If we move up to trying to get 1440p 60 FPS as well as medium settings instead of low settings, they're asking us to go up to an RTX 3070 or a 7600 XT. Now, these GPUs are a little further apart. We'll take a look at that in a second. Also remember that there could be some upscaling being used here. Maybe quality-ish level upscaling if it fits what like the Oblivion Remastered did from these same developers using Unreal Engine 5. So do keep that in mind. Now this thing's 3070 or 7600 XT. So if we keep the 2060 superset as the baseline, you may be able to find your GPU somewhere in line. Again, this was the 1080p 60 low. Now we're scrolling up to more powerful GPUs. Now, to get to that 1440p 60 FPS medium, maybe you're spotting your GPU here. Well, we can see the 7600 XT is only about 37% more powerful than their 2060 Super they listed. But actually, we need to go even further to get to that 3070 they listed. That's 72% more powerful. So I've got to say, this particular pairing is a little bit weird. There's a pretty big gap in performance there. Now, if I set the 3070 as the baseline, that's still an 8GB card, so medium settings 1440p 60, potentially with some upscaling, they're saying should be okay on an 8GB card. But again, the 7600 XT is reaching 79% of the performance of the 3070. But again, these aren't benchmark charts, they're ballpark figures. So maybe the 3070 averages a little over 60 FPS, maybe the 7600 XT is averaging a little under 60 FPS at these same settings, or one's a little more reliant on upscaling than the other. Who knows? It just seems like a little bit of a weird pairing. Now, their next jump is all the way up to 4K 60 at high settings, which is a 3080 Ti or a 9070. But again, the high settings here could be still relying on some upscaling. Again, if they're in line with what they did with the Oblivion Remastered stuff. Now, how far do we have to go? Well, if we keep the 3070 as the baseline, again, maybe you'll spot your GPU somewhere on the side here, so you can kind of see where you fall into these system requirements. If we go up to the 3080 Ti, first of all, note that that's a 12GB card. So it's now, it's potentially the case that you would need more than 8GB of VRAM here. And I would actually expect that for 4K 60, even if they're using some upscaling at the high settings. 3080 Ti was a 12GB card, and it's 40% more powerful than the 3070. Now, they're listing the 9070 as the AMD option here, and it's actually not worlds apart from the 3080 Ti. If we set the 3080 Ti as the baseline, the 9070 is more powerful, but it's about 13% more powerful, so these aren't like completely off. Also, it's possible that they could be using the hardware-based ray tracing here, because really the 3080 Ti would be more equivalent to like an AMD like 6800 XT or 6900 XT. But if they're using hardware-based ray tracing, it's possible that those older AMD cards might not be keeping up, but the 9070 would do a much better job. Now they're saying to go up to 4K 60 at Ultra. Again, that could be less upscaling used if it works the way it did with the with their previous game. Or even no upscaling used, potentially. The 4080 is another 34% of performance. That's increasing the graphics settings and potentially less upscaling. We'll have to see. So that's a 34% jump to get to the 4080. So that's what I've got for you guys today. Hopefully you found this video useful and or interesting. Again, I'm excited for some of that nostalgia, reliving some of my youth there, probably find some of the old Halo friends and do some online co-op or something. Anyway, hope you guys found the video useful and or interesting. Don't forget you can check out Play Tracker, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.